Pleasure to speak to Dr. Hennie Geldenhuys, who's actually been one of my professors in uni. And we were studying integrative medicine, the mind-body connection, and that's exactly the topic that we will go into today. All things psychosomatic illnesses, right? The placebo effect, and especially coming from someone like Dr. Hennie, who has like a background in medicine as a medical doctor, and giving some more, let's say, legitimacy really to the connection between the mind and the body. And so maybe just to start, Dr. Hennie, because you have a background not only, like I said, in conventional medicine, but also in quite cutting edge fields like transpersonal psychology and holistic healing, really. And I would love to see if you can maybe start by explaining a little bit to us, like what it actually means, like the mind-body connection, and also what really led you as a medical professional to go down further into that kind of area, into that kind of space and field.
Yes, thank you. And it's always lovely to talk about these things, and I think they're really important. And I think one of the reasons why we need to talk about it is just because this sounds like a sort of left field concept, but it's actually very natural. So this mind-body connection to me is certainly not something alien. It has been there always. But I think sometimes we sort of forget about it. And so my particular journey has been interesting. I started off my career as a general practitioner, as a medical doctor, general practitioner, years and years ago. I won't say how long, but it's been decades and decades. And I've been a medical professional for more years in my life than I haven't been. And for many years, as a GP, as a general practitioner, I enjoyed what I was doing, but there was always this sense that there is something more. And I was seeing my patients, but I wasn't necessarily promoting healing. I was curing, but I wasn't necessarily healing. Sometimes I did, probably more by accident. And I started wondering, there was this restlessness in me that surely there's more to this. But at the time, I didn't know what that meant. And I certainly didn't have training. I was very much into the conventional medical paradigm. And then I was sort of burnt out in general practice, largely because of that frustration, I suppose. And I went into research, and I was into the research field for many years, doing only research. But gradually there was this calling to explore things like transpersonal coaching, hypnotherapy, and other modalities. And that led me down to the path that has brought me here today. And I started naturally seeing the synchronicities and how this is actually all one, right? How understanding how the human psyche works and understanding how spirituality works is just another side to the coin of being embodied, being an embodied being. And so things like health, illness, disease, treatment, management, it's not one or the other. We can practice conventional allopathic medicine, but we can at the same time respect the other dimensions of our being. And so our experience of spirituality, our emotional, beyond just the psychological, but our presence, our beingness, if I may call it that, and how that sits within, alongside our physical beingness, alongside the somatic. So to me, the psychosomatic is a little bit of it's a little bit of a misnomer, because isn't everything psychosomatic? We can't experience our psyches except through our bodies, and we can't experience our bodies except through our psyches.
Yes.
And that's brought me here today, speaking to you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the psychosomatic is just really a concept that you and I have been diving quite deep into in uni when I was studying with you. And it really deeply stayed with me, obviously, because of my own journey with chronic illness, especially with, all of the eczema, psoriasis, hives that I was struggling for over 7 years, but also alongside of that, like severe brain fog, gut issues, hair loss, like just, yeah, all different types of things that were really not matching with how healthily I was living on paper. Okay, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. But let's stay just with the psychosomatic element for a moment, because, unfortunately, I feel that it still carries more of like a woo-woo stigma for many people who say, oh, psychosomatic, that's so alternative and weird. But I would love to hear from you, like you already touched on, like what really is psychosomatic? What does it mean? And how should it be understood?
Yeah. Yes, that's an important concept. When you talk about the psychosomatic, well, there's one of three reactions you can get. Hopefully, if you're somewhere like in the space we are right now, it's an important term. It has all sorts of implications, and we embrace it. But you can have one or two other reactions. Sometimes, particularly among some of my more, let's call it traditionally minded colleagues, psychosomatic is a negative term, right? It's if you can't diagnose your patient, or if you think it's all in their head, whatever that might mean, then you sort of dismissively call it, oh, it's just psychosomatic, right? Which is an incredibly dismissive, judgmental attitude, I think. The other potential reaction is like you've alluded to, right? Psychosomatic, oh, like this new agey thing, right? What does it actually mean? Sounds nice in principle, but what does it mean in real life? I think the psychosomatic is all of the above, but it's the psychosomatic is, it's what we are, right? It's what we are. And we need to realize that we are physical beings. So, I'm not going to treat your fracture, your bone fracture, with meditation. So sometimes we are more of a physical being in terms of, say, treatment, right? By the same notion, if you are going through a dark night of the soul, or you're going through a spiritual emergence or a spiritual emergency, I should probably not be treating you with medication, because that has a different aspect that we need to address. And so it's as if us as beings, we're on a continuum, but it's all of those things all together. We are physical beings, and at the same time we are energetic beings, and we are spiritual beings. All that really changes is we need to be flexible in our focus, and because our minds probably struggle to appreciate all our dimensions of being all the time. But as a practitioner, and whatever type of practitioner you might be, we need to have the flexibility to jump between appreciating someone's psychological domain, someone's physical domain, and someone's perhaps spiritual or energetic domain, and have a sensitivity that we are all of those things together. So you asked me, what is the psychosomatic? Traditionally, it's where the psyche and the body interface, but to me it's more, they're actually the same thing. They're just different sides of the same coin.
I love that, because I feel like from my own personal experience, when I went to most medical doctors in my life, obviously primarily dermatologists in my case, they were primarily just treating the physical dimension. But like you said, it's all connected. We can literally not treat the body just as this machine where you insert a certain supplement or you put on a certain cream and it works for every single person, because quite literally every body is different, right? Because it's not like a machine where you just tweak this thing. It's like a living organism that we inhabit. And so, I wonder, when it comes to stress, trauma, emotions, beliefs, even something like intergenerational trauma or karma, perhaps, right? From a more spiritual perspective, how does that actually physically affect the body? And of course, I'm always particularly curious about the skin. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned skin, and of course, skin conditions. The skin is a classic psychosomatic exemplar, an example, a classic example of the psychosomatic. And it's, I mean, ask any practitioner or any sufferer of a chronic skin condition, and they will say to you, well, yes, obviously there is an emotional connection, but we don't always appreciate that. And so you're right? We have this chronic skin condition. It's often treated in a fragmented way. So, for example, just, prescribe a steroid cream and don't use fragmented soap and that sort of thing. That's the general advice, which is important because we are still treating the physical body. So I'm not saying throw out all the conventional medical treatments. That's not what I'm saying. But I do agree with you that chronic skin conditions are often an example of exactly where the psychosomatic is at play, because a sufferer will tell you that when they are stressed, when they are anxious, when they haven't been sleeping well, when they're going through a difficult time in their life, they get flare-ups of, let's say, the eczema or whatever chronic skin condition it might be. And the other thing about the skin is it's literally on the outside, right? So you can see it happening. It's more obvious than other psychosomatic conditions, if we can call it that. And so the skin is a really important. Also, it's often it's not the skin. In a way, the skin is literally what's happening on the outside from an inner process. And so if you are going to help someone with a chronic skin condition, it's more than just treating them biomedically, because if you don't give them the opportunity to work through that inner stuff, whether it be at a psychological level or at some deeper level beyond even normal psychology, then you're not really addressing the issue, right? Some people might go as far as to say that any illness is a manifestation. It's a message. Now, I'm very careful to say that, because if I say that to someone who's suffering from an illness, it sounds like I'm dismissing you. It's not important. You need to go through this. This is your life journey, which is great. It sounds great, but to a sufferer, it's like actually it's quite demeaning. So I use that very respectfully. But just to point out that, yeah, I think our outer experience, our bodily experience, is only one aspect. And I think as a patient, but also as a practitioner, and everyone else, in fact, we need to appreciate that it's everything that we need to address, not just one aspect.
I love that. And Henny, I just remembered a model that really stuck with me from uni. And I think it was this like 4-quadrant model where, one thing you already mentioned with like a bone fracture, and treating a very real physical thing with like meditation or hypnotherapy or brain rewiring would not be making a lot of sense, right? And then I always mix up the second and the third one, but basically the progression amongst those 4 quadrants is that it gets from the more physical angle to a more inner and invisible level, okay? And like stage 2 is basically maybe even something like skin conditions, because they are visible, right? Like when you go to the doctor, they see, wow, big red patches, clearly something's wrong, right? Then there's even more of a level of internal symptoms, like for example, chronic pain is even more difficult from someone like a practitioner, a doctor, to diagnose. Like, how would you as an external person know in how much pain I am, right? You can ask me like on a scale from 1 to 10, but even then, if I say 10, maybe that would be your 5. Who knows, right? And then there's something, I think there was even more like subtle and difficult, like fibromyalgia, or like really subjective inner experiences that are not to be dismissed, right? Like they're real, because everything that we experience is real. And so obviously there's a spectrum of symptoms. And I guess, yeah, maybe again, coming back to you as a practitioner, that it would make sense for doctors to really look at where the patient is, right? I had an appendix surgery like earlier, was it this year? End of last year. And again, I was grateful for modern medicine in that context, right? But when I was studying with you and really struggling from severe chronic illness, and I think that's kind of the angle that I want to move towards now, when something turns chronic, I feel that the modern medical Western system of medicine is often letting us down. So, what is your take on, when especially a skin rash, doesn't just appear because we're nervous or like we've been scratching or, like an emotional reaction has happened or a physical trigger has happened and then it subsides again. But what if it becomes chronic? What's happening in the body there?
Yes. Yes, good question. There are different lenses through which we can try and answer that question. We could look at it purely through a biomedical lens, right? And we could go into all sorts of details about biological and metabolical pathways and that sort of thing. But another, perhaps I think more useful way to look at it is to see the body as a balance of things, the body and the psyche as a balance of things. And there are certain clusters, let's call them systems within the body, that when these systems are out of alignment, then we start suffering, we start experiencing distress, and we call that disease, right? And so, for example, there are many of them, but there's the pain management system in our bodies. And we are supposed to feel pain because that's a warning sign, for example, that something is wrong. We need to do something to alleviate the pain, right? So pain in itself is not a bad thing. It's a thing that is developed to protect us. The same with inflammation, for example. When we injure ourselves and there's inflammation around that body part, that's the body's way of promoting healing. So inflammation is not a bad thing on its own, but when it is out of balance, out of sync, then we get things like hyperinflammatory conditions. And the immune system is another example, right? The immune system is this magical, wonderful system that protects us in all sorts of ways. But when it's out of alignment, then we get things like autoimmune diseases. And in skin conditions, for example, we know that plays a huge role. And I can name many of those systems. Another system, for example, is the so-called vagal system. Our vagal system, mediated through our vagal nerve, is it's the biological pathway that relaxes us, to put it really, really simple, slows down our heart rate, stimulates our parasympathetic system. So it's important for us to rest and heal and regenerate. It might be overactivated and then we get chronic fatigue, or it might be underactivated and then we're in a hyperarousal state the whole time. And so, it's when something is out of balance. So Eastern medicine has a focus on this, about balance, and there's something in that, isn't there? So when something becomes chronic, when a condition becomes chronic, those systems are out of alignment. Something is not modulating itself. So either because there's continuous activation, so there's some perhaps inner shadow work that we need to do because we are being activated psychologically the whole time, or there's some irritant perhaps in our subconscious that we haven't really addressed, and our body is reacting to that, because our body is an extension of our psyche, as our psyche is an extension of our body. So if there's something going on in the one part, then it's inevitably going to reflect in the other part, which is why we need this more sort of holistic approach.
Yes, and that already reminds me of a whole angle that I was totally geeking out on at the time when I was dealing with all of my own symptoms. I think it was called metaphysical anatomy, and I was like really trying to see, oh, okay, like if it manifests on, your right upper arm, then that means this and this and this. Or if you have eczema, then that means you have suppressed emotions in this and this and this area. And, you know, I found that interesting, and it almost reminded me like a little bit of astrology, of where I also see like, oh, this applies to quite a lot of people, not to everybody, but I can see that. But still, with either of them, I sometimes struggle with overgeneralization, you know, of just like, just because I have eczema, does that really mean that I have like anger issues? Or is there something else at play under the surface? And so I'm wondering, when you're saying like the body is an extension of the psyche and the psyche is an extension of the body, like how can we, like understand a little bit more of what is actually going on communication wise between the two in our specific case? Like, how does that work? Or even as a practitioner, how would you approach that when someone comes to you and or they tell you like, hey, Dr. Hennie, like I have done all of those things, you know, like I'm living super healthy. Like in my case, I even remember telling you, I was like, look, I have done all the diets, all the freaking detoxes out there, okay? Like I've been vegan, I've been carnivore, I've done plant medicine, I've done all types of juicing and fasting and this and bent backwards and over the top again. All the creams, all the meditation, I've literally done it all, and still I was so sick. And, you know, besides the fact that I've also done like a lot of mental work, which I want to touch on later, if someone lives very healthily already and they're telling you I'm doing all the right things on paper, like how do you then help discern, diagnose, and obviously treat the more mental angle of that person?
Yeah. You started off your question talking about so-called metaphysical mapping, which in my opinion, right, it's just my opinion, but I think that starts off on the wrong way, because I don't think it's that simple, right? To say, oh, you have eczema on your right arm, therefore you have a problem with this or that in your life, or, you know, that body part relates to that problem or that chakra or that sort of thing. It might be true, right? But in my experience, it's not, because it's a very individual thing.
Exactly.
So I don't think we can generalize in that way. Each person is unique. Each person is an individual. Each person and each person's body has his or her own story. So how would I approach it? Well, to me, it's not intervening, it's holding space. So the coach in me, the transpersonal coach, is saying, we are there to hold space. I'm not there to tell you what to do. And I might just start off by allowing you to tell your story. You know, how often do people come to us and no one has ever really listened to what they are saying? Because especially in terms of diagnosis, practitioners want to put people into boxes. They want to make a diagnosis, and they want to do so quickly and efficiently so that they can give them the treatment for that particular box. But we don't live in boxes. We live all over the place. That's how we are. We're messy beings. And so perhaps we can get really far by allowing someone just to tell their story. You know, you've had this chronic condition. When did it start? Start wherever you want to, start at the end or the middle, whatever suits you. I'm going to listen for a while. Tell me how you arrived here today. And it's fascinating sometimes just to let people tell you that story. And there's plenty of wisdom in any narrative. So that's the first thing, right? I think people need the opportunity just to tell their story. Yes. The other thing, you know, maybe part of holding that space is helping people to connect with their bodies, and specifically with the condition for which they are suffering for. So again, I'm not going to tell you what your issue is or how to heal it, because you are going to do that yourself. I might think or even say to my client, you know, there's this concept of the felt sense of something. So there's a famous practitioner by the name of Gendlin, who in the 1960s and 70s actually formulated this concept, which in many ways forms an approach, modern approaches to embodiment and somatic therapies. And he always talked about this felt sense. It's difficult to put into words, but it's how an experience feels, right? And probably the best way to experience a felt sense is somatically, and arising from that somatic or bodily experience, sometimes we can start attaching words or images to it. So I might work with that client or that patient, and I would say to them, we're not going to ignore your chronic system like your chronic eczema. We're not going to ignore it, and neither I'm going to try and suppress it. But if you were to somehow start listening to it, now that you've told your story, and you will start to listening to that eczema as if it were a person. Imagine it were a live being and it were talking to you. Whatever would it say? And how does it feel? And if you really had to sort of experience that felt sense of that condition, whatever it might be, what occurs to you? What comes up for you? And then whatever does come up for that client, we would work with it. That is the handle. That's where we start.
I love this so much because everybody listening who is working with brain rewiring with me knows exactly that this is what we're doing. Because I agree. I mean, especially obviously based on the whole science behind the connection between the brain and the skin, the easiest way to understand it is literally just like when you're embarrassed, you turn red. When you're scared, your skin turns all pale, like the skin is a very emotional organ, so to say, that really like expresses our feelings and what's kind of happening on the inside. And so a saying that I really love is that history often matters just as much as biology, and unfortunately, I've been to countless dermatologists in my career, so to say, and I don't think I've ever been there more than 7 minutes max before they handed me just yet another different variation of a steroid cream, or try to get me on even stronger pills and meds or injections and stuff like that. And so it's pretty, coming back to the psychosomatic, right, and the connection between the mind and the body and the brain and the skin. It's a flawed approach, in my opinion, to not listen to what a person has actually gone through that shaped their body, almost like scars, but on the inside, right? That hurt, and that then hurt on many different levels, again, because it's all kind of interconnected. And so, yeah, I really love that you're bringing, especially from your perspective as a medical doctor, like more awareness to that, because where I've been and where I see so many other women struggle, especially kind of like in the days of, social media, where everybody just says, all disease starts in your gut. Okay, and everybody is just so obsessed with gut health and with balancing their hormones. And just like, there's, again, nothing wrong with that. You might have a physical imbalance and it's worth taking a few tests and checking like what's going on, right? But I just see, again, in myself and in so many women out there, a strong tendency towards orthorexia, right? Like the obsession with being healthy, to the point where, I'm sorry, but it's not healthy anymore. Like that's not normal when you cannot live your life because you're always in fear about, oh my God, there's some toxins in there and now I cannot eat this because it's gonna, flare me up. And so I really wonder, like, can orthorexia, literally as the obsession with health itself, and trying to constantly optimize our physical body so that we can prevent the next flare-up, can that actually become the source or a big contributor to stress that keeps the body and the skin stuck at the end of the day?
Oh yes, absolutely. Oh, for sure. And I think that's often a significant factor, right? Because it produces anxiety. It latches onto that perfectionist trait that many of us have. it's fascinating, right? There's actually some data that shows this, that chronic skin condition, sufferers of chronic skin conditions, they often have this trait, this personality trait of perfectionism, right? So,
I
and
don't feel
so
seen
they,
right now.
well, I'm not saying, I'm just suggesting, but
I do.
yes. So, and then these people get driven because they, as you say, right, they want to have this super healthy lifestyle, and it just
Mm.
sort of feeds the beast. It actually makes it worse. Um, Now, again, right, one should individualize because someone else might have the opposite problem. Someone else might have a sort of a very passive, careless attitude to their physical health. And maybe once they've gone through a process, their outcome of the process would be, well, maybe I do need to eat better. Maybe I do need to exercise more. Um, but how that looks is different for each individual, right? And it's a solution that should come from you, from the inside. This obsessive healthiness, especially fed by things like social media, it's coming from the outside. It's other people telling you what health is. And what health is for me is not necessarily what health is for you. Probably along the way, we'll have lots of common ground. If we follow a healthy lifestyle, it would probably look very similar. But exactly how it manifests for me is individual and it's unique. Perhaps you don't know yet as my client, but I'll help you to discover what that means for you.
Mm. Yes, I couldn't agree more because like the tendency to search for answers, right? For meaning as to what the hell is happening in my own body. Like I need to know what's going on because if I would just know and understand the magical root cause of the whole thing, then I could control it, right? Just not eat this or just always do that. But what I observed is that behind this like desire for control is actually just this need for feeling safe, right?
Yeah,
I'm okay. Like things are well, I'm not gonna die, you know, and things are not gonna get even worse. And so this fundamental need of safety, which is obviously very tied to the whole conversation around nervous system regulation, feeling safe as one of the most fundamental needs of a human being, right?
yeah,
And it's yeah, I want to like tie this conversation a little bit more to like the whole placebo idea again because again
mm,
like if we're so convinced that our issues are purely physical simply because someone else told us that this is how it is and all disease starts in the gut, obviously that belief is strong, right? And then maybe the diet will actually work for us, right? But then it's like again, how much of it is just physical and how much of it is mental at some point. And it's funny because, again, in my own case, I always had this deeper inner voice that told me, Mia, all of your issues actually have nothing to do with your body. Like, you're exercising, you're eating really well, you're doing all the things, lady. Okay, like you're good.
mm,
And still my
mm,
conscious mind was like, nah, you just want to take the easy path. You just need to do another detox, you know, and just like go harder and like earn your health back. Right? And so in hindsight, I can see that this inner little voice was right, but it was not rational and I couldn't really therefore trust it, I guess, because it didn't have like a solid ground. It was just kind of more of a feeling, and I just always doubted it. And so, yeah, is that also something that you experience, like this push pull between maybe, let's call it intuition, you know, or like just inner knowingness and the deeper levels, I guess, of the mind, of the being, of the soul, perhaps even, versus the mind and the cognicentrism, right? Like the focus on the brain and the mind and logic that we're so trained to be using all the time.
yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. And I think in our Western society, we are cognicentric. We've forgotten our bodies in a way. We've forgotten we are embodied beings. You know, there's plenty of research. I mean, this is not new. This is old stuff. that our bodies know things before our mind, before our brain knows things. And one can prove this in a lab quite easily.
Yes.
We have a visceral reaction, our vital signs change and our physiological signs change before we even have a thought. And so it's everything starts in the body before it filters upwards to our mind. Western thinking says the opposite, right? It starts in our mind and it filters down to our body. It's probably a little bit of both, to be honest, right? So we're not saying ignore your thinking, ignore your cognition, not at all. And we have these beautiful analytic minds that can work on solutions. But we can't rely only on our thinking minds, because the brain is not really good at manufacturing a biological solution or a somatic solution. It's not good at manufacturing healing, but it's good at putting a plan in place. But if we aren't in contact with our bodies, we don't know what plan to put in place. So it's as if we jump in right at the end and we do all these strategies. This is what I should eat. This is what I should do, right? This is the treatment that I should use. Before we've actually listened to our intuition. I agree with you, Mia. Intuition is important. It's not as simple as it sounds, though, right? Because intuition
Yes.
can be wrong.
Yeah.
Of course, our intuition can be wrong. We have this thought, and it's actually not an original thought. It's just something subconscious that we've picked up some way. And so it's we need to go through a process of introspection. We need to go through a process of self-reflection. We need to really sort of examine, arising from the inside, using our minds, using all our dimensions, to actually examining what's happening with us and through us. And you talk about rewiring. That's another thing. We need to sort of validate that experience, because it's not all in the mind. It's not that a sufferer is making it up. Their bodies have adapted to this dysfunctional way of being. And so the bodies are literally rewired. The neurology is rewired. Your immunology is rewired. Your skin tissue is rewired, okay? So it is partly biological. And it's not to say, you can just think it away. That's not what I'm saying. You'll have to do the work, because you need to reprogram, rewire your body. But before you can do that, you sort of need to be in touch with your body, right?
Mm-hmm. How would you start that, getting in touch with your body? What do you mean by that?
Sometimes it's really simple. It doesn't need to be complicated. Sometimes it's just setting the intent, right? So feel your body right now while we're sitting here. We can do that. We can be talking to each other, and yet we have this almost like background awareness of our physical being. You could sort of do it more systematically. You could, for example, do what's called a body scan, which a man by the name of John Kabat-Zinn made famous, and literally scan your body. So imagine your awareness scanning your body all the way up from the soles of your feet, through your heels, through your lower legs, your thighs, your pelvis, your abdomen, the inside of the abdomen, all your organs, and your chest, your heart, right up to your neck and your brain. And while you're at it, imagine your awareness sort of sitting over your skin, for example, and just being, right? Just sensing. That's already a great start. And maybe you can sort of develop some sort of practice. I'm not going to call it a meditation practice. Let's call it an awareness practice. And maybe I can help you, or you can develop some way of doing that. I might say to my client, whatever works for you, to get into the habit. It becomes almost like a ritual. It becomes a practice. This is the work, that you devise ways to become aware of what your body is feeling like from moment to moment. How is your body moving today? Where is it feeling? Is there a particular part of your body that is drawing attention? But don't forget about the other parts that are happy, So it's more an intent. And yes, there are many types of meditation, somatic meditations. But ultimately, it's something that each individual needs to discover for themselves. If you set the intent to be in contact with your body, where is this going to end if you do the work?
Yes. Even just now, whilst you're saying, hey, we're having this conversation, I know for myself that I hold a lot of tension in my stomach. And I was even just like being present and then just like relaxing my stomach a little bit more. And noticing I'm sitting here in this room right now having a conversation with Henny, and at the same time letting a little bit more relaxation be in my body whilst also being in my head and in my heart in connection with you, right? And so, kind of like having contact, I guess, with someone or something that we're up to and ourselves to kind of like start, yeah, like an expansion, I guess, of our awareness in that way to include the body whilst we're being in our mind, right? To kind of like integrate it rather than being like, oh, I should only be in my body or only in the mind or only this, only that. No, to kind of like just create more of a synthesis of being. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
And yeah, go ahead. Did you want to add something?
No, I was just I was picking up on what you were saying earlier about the placebo effect. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
really, such an interesting discussion as well, Mia, isn't it? So, what is the placebo effect? Well, the placebo effect, in strict medical terms, is when something has an effect, a biological effect, like a medication, for example, and it shouldn't, because it's like chemically inert. It's like a sugar pill or a salt water injection. So, in theory, it shouldn't do anything, and yet we see the placebo effect all over. I don't really like the term placebo because I think it has a negative connotation. When people hear the word placebo, they sort of, it's a little bit of a judgment. Oh, it's placebo effect, right?
Mm,
I think the so-called placebo effect is wonderful. I think it's beautiful because we can
absolutely.
harness it, we can use it. I would rather call it something else, perhaps something like the embodied meaning response. Because there's
Mm,
this notion, and this is my experience to a large part, that the meaning that we attach to things is what induces the effect. So it's the meaning that we attach to something. And when we embody it, it's even more powerful, the embodied meaning response. And who knows, maybe all medication is like that. Maybe it's not the medication. Maybe it's the meaning that we are unconsciously attaching to the medication. And so one can extend that beyond just medications to any form of therapy, any form of treatment. Is that sort of effect, even though there's no active intervention. We know from the literature that there are certain things that amplify that placebo effect or that embodied meaning response effect. For example, if there's a level of expectancy, right? If you have faith in your practitioner, for example, and you have an expectancy that something is going to work, or conditioning in the sense that you've had experience that this has worked before, so it's probably going to work again, or maybe it's even cultural expectancy, cultural conditioning. In my culture, this is the treatment that we've always recognized works. But also these meaning responses, they work well when we are partnering with the body. So we have existing biological pathways that, when amplified, are going to do the job for us. So, for example, we have natural pain dampening effects, our natural opioids in our brain. We have natural immune modulators. So when we have like a flare-up of our eczema, for example, we have natural immune modulators that can regulate that reaction, and so many others. So when we work with the body, and when we work with evolution, which has produced these wonderful bodies that we have, and we amplify those effects, then again we come back to that harmony we were talking about earlier.
I have so many things I want to say to this. Even just like, let's start with the expectancy piece, maybe, because,
Mm.
it's funny because I'm wearing a white shirt today, but like literally, when you have someone in a white coat, okay,
Mm.
that there's already kind of like this hierarchy, but also like the authority at the end of the day of like, hey, like this person is probably able to help me. They have like a whole bunch of, certifications and degrees and experience and blah, 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 which increases your expectancy that this person can help. Same with like, take something like Amazon reviews, right? Of like, my expectancy of this product is high because 5,000 other people have said that it's really good, So like my trust obviously increases in this product and in the buying decision because of all of these reviews, right? Ultimately, it comes down a lot to trust. And I think what I've seen to be a missing piece sometimes is this trust in ourselves, right?
Yes.
To always hand it over to someone else and say, I hope that this person can heal me. I hope that this person has the answer and this protocol is going to be the thing, right? But what I often encourage the women that I work with, and also even like myself at the time, of like, if you have the belief, coming back to belief, that this is not going to work for me, well, you're not setting yourself up for success here, right? And so that's why this belief, I think, needs to change first for anything that you want to try next to even have a chance to work for you. Whether you want to take another supplement, or you want to do another detox protocol, or you want to try the next cream, or you want to try something, like brain rewiring or hypnosis or meditation or, CBT, whatever you want to try. But like if you have this belief in place, then the chances are that none of these things are really going to work out for you, which is why I think the inner work and working on beliefs, right, is such a crucial starting point in order for any healing and success to be happening.
Absolutely right. In fact, there's an opposite effect of placebo called nocebo, which is
Yeah,
literally the opposite effect. It's when something
like the
that
evil
has a
twin.
negative effect, right? And
Yes,
but what you're saying, Mia, there's plenty of wisdom in what you're saying. I can see you know about this stuff. But yes,
I learned from a
and that
great
belief.
professor back then.
Oh, wow. I don't know about that, um, but yes, but that belief is also it's not unconditional belief. We're not talking about fanatical belief, right? We're talking about a cultured belief, an organic belief. I'm trying to think of the right words. It's an emergent belief. It's something that comes out of a person. It's not something that is given to a person. And so, you know, you might believe on a superficial level that this detox program is it, right? It's going to work. But perhaps at a deeper level, you don't really believe it's going to work because it's never worked before. Why is it going to work this time? But then maybe the next person, due to their particular makeup, due to their particular experiences, as they are doing that inner work, maybe they do develop an inner belief that if their body is going to detox, they are going to feel better. Maybe biological detox doesn't make sense. It doesn't, right? A detox biologically doesn't make sense because what are you actually doing when you're detoxing biologically? It shouldn't work. But maybe for that particular person, it becomes a so-called placebo effect, becomes an embodied meaning response. And if it works for them because they've done the inner work and they have that individual belief in that, wonderful. Why not, right? I mean, this placebo effect, this meaning response is beautiful, but maybe it's the sufferer's part. And if someone is helping them, like a practitioner like yourself, maybe our job is to hold the space so that you could develop your own belief that makes sense for you as an individual. Because only then will we activate that placebo or that embodied meaning response.
Reminds me of the book title from Dr. Joe Dispenza, You Are the Placebo, right? Like literally, you
Yes.
have to kind of create your own medicine at the end of the day, right? And
Yes.
not even to say
Right.
that we have a whole pharmacy up in our brain that we can unleash, like in different ways. But I really
Yes.
like your reframe of like this meaning response, because again, what I see often in clients is that the meaning that they associate with chronic illness, and especially with chronic skin issues, obviously, is that I'm doing something wrong. There's something that I'm doing wrong for me to have this. And so there's a lot of self-blame and self-judgment and criticism and fear, right? Of like, what's wrong with me?
Yes.
Hello,
Yes.
like what's going on?
Yes.
And so, like, this kind of meaning obviously cascades a whole biological response in the body, right? Of like fear,
Mm.
okay, something is wrong, alarm, which is obviously not the nice rest and digest state that we want to be in for skin repair and other things to take care of themselves. Because
Mm.
the thing is, like, I always think when I cut myself, okay, accidentally, when I cut some carrots, do I have to suddenly take a specific supplement or follow a specific protocol in order for this cut to heal? Like, no, my body actually knows how to do this stuff. And that it
Mm.
has a lot to do, we were speaking about the perfectionism earlier, with control, right? Of like, I
Mm.
need to make this happen, this skin healing
Mm.
thing, rather
Mm.
than remembering, like, hey, my hair is growing right now.
Yes.
My heart is beating, like I'm breathing without really paying attention to it. And skin repair is one of those things. And so, coming back to like the idea of this meaning response, what do you think? How could we reframe it when we deal with chronic illness and literally try so damn hard to heal ourselves and still nothing seems to work? Like, how do we actually not slip into something like self-blame, which seems like a very legitimate,
Yeah.
normal response to go into?
Absolutely. I think self-blame, guilt, shame, I think those are things that often stand in our way.
Mm.
Um, and that is also a belief that's sometimes really difficult to address, and it takes a lot of work, because for someone who is suffering from, say, a chronic skin condition or any other medical condition, for them to start believing that there's nothing wrong with them, right? It's not that you're broken. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's not that you have failed. It's not that. It's simply an experience of being in a physical body. And sometimes we are going to have these experiences that are painful and that cause us suffering. But it's not because you have failed. Oh,
Mm.
my word. I've had clients that when I sort of tell them that, they just start crying because it's as if this huge weight has been lifted off them, right? It's not you. You're not broken. You're not doing anything wrong. But then, it's also managing expectations, and I say that not managing in the sense of set yourself up for failure, but you also start thinking about what does it mean to you, right? There's a difference between a cure, for example, and healing. A cure is, in biological terms, is when the condition is gone. It's never going to come back again. Sometimes we can cure something, sometimes not. It might be that you will sit with this chronic skin condition for the rest of your life. I can't promise you it's not going to be the case, but you can start to make peace with it. You can start to manage it. You can have healing even though you don't have curing. Now, very often, interestingly enough, when someone reaches that point, they do get a cure, but it happens all on its own. It's not engineered. They didn't try and do it. So when in doubt, actually do less, probably, but it's more changing your relationship with that condition than it is trying to address it directly.
Oh my God, I could not agree more. That's where I've suddenly and very quickly seen changes at the end of the day when it came to my healing, when I literally felt like I've done it all for so many years. And I was like, okay, well, I'm in my mid 20s. I really shouldn't be chronically ill with all the stuff that I'm doing. But now, you know, do I want to suffer for the rest of my life and feel self pity and hide away at home and let the best years of my life kind of like slip away? Or do I try, try to somehow live with it, even though it still sucked a lot? I was
Mhm.
still crying several times a week because I was in so much pain. I couldn't even bend my arms without cracking open, bleeding everywhere. Like, it was painful on so many levels, but I was like, what's my option? I mean, I honestly don't know what to do anymore. And so when I started to let go of the idea that healing is even possible and somehow just try to live on in a way that is nicer than, like just feeling bad all the time, that's when things started really shifting very quickly. When I did less, a lot less, because I was like, you know what, whatever, I'm just gonna live my life. Who cares? When I did a lot less, tried to control a lot less, work on the acceptance piece, and just let go and let God, I think is the saying, right? Kind of like hand over to a higher power that I don't understand, but I hope it exists, right? That's where, and that's why my fascination for transpersonal psychology, right? And like the beyond the ego, the more spiritual realms that I think every good scientist should heavily include in their work. That's where it really kind of like was bearing the fruit. I was understanding that intellectually for a long time, but then again, coming back to the embodied piece, somehow it was just clicking more deeply. And I think almost like with the chemical reaction, right? It builds and it builds and it builds. And now in hindsight, I can see so well all the lessons that I needed to learn throughout this whole journey, that are setting me up for the rest of my life. And I can see like, wow, my skin has been the biggest spiritual teacher ever. Like the amounts that I learned through this, wow, I probably would have not learned otherwise. And so, yeah, almost like a certain gratitude now in hindsight, but also obviously gratitude to be on the other side. And I do want to speak a little bit more because it just came to me on the idea of like getting a diagnosis, because that's something obviously as a medical doctor you have probably given diagnosis in your life, or a lot of your colleagues do. And I would really love to hear, because so many people I feel get hung up on them, and like, I have psoriasis, that means that it's an autoimmune condition, which is even worse, than like other conditions. And then like the whole fear spiral and all of the attachments of like a treatment path, and this is my destination and this is what happens now. Even worse with something like cancer, right? Like we know that when someone gets a cancer diagnosis, it's like they go downhill really quickly. And I don't think because of sudden physical changes in the body, but because the mind and the heart and like how that actually lands in someone, and then the physical consequences as a result of that. But yeah, like, what are your thoughts on giving or being given a diagnosis, considering all the fear and stress that can come with that?
That's a really good point. And my response is yes, but, or yes, and. Um, Many people, they want a diagnosis, particularly if it's something that is difficult to put a name to. So for example, if I have a client who comes with a so-called medically unexplained symptom, and actually many of those people who suffer like perhaps atypical or strange symptoms, experiences, and they can't get a diagnosis because there isn't really a diagnosis. No one can really tell them what's, again, I use this word, what's wrong with them, which is, of course, the wrong words to use. No one can tell them what's going on. Now, sometimes they appreciate a diagnosis. It's because we as humans don't like uncertainty. So in a sense, people want a diagnosis, right? Because it gives them something to hold on to. Of course, the shadow side of that, the danger side, is that that diagnosis becomes a label. It becomes more than just naming something. It becomes your identity. I am an excess sufferer. I am this. I am that. I am the cancer. Instead of, that is part of me, I'm not denying that, but I'm also other things apart from that. And so I'm not suggesting that we don't make diagnoses, but I'm saying that we treat a diagnosis as just an umbrella term. And I might explain this to a client and say, you have something called psoriasis. You can go and look it up. You know, everything is on the internet these days. Ask the AI. The AI will give you lots of facts on it. I'm saying you have that, but you know, each person's experience of that particular condition is very, very different. It might be different for you than for someone else. So I'm giving you the name in case you want to go and think about it and do some research about it. But please, that is not entirely what you have. It's not what you are. It's just a convenient name so that when we talk about it, we can call it something. Otherwise, it's like this nameless thing and we don't know where to start the conversation. That should probably be the type of attitude that we have around diagnoses.
Yes. Even just like naming it for yourself, right? Like how do you want to call it? Maybe it's not eczema, maybe it's called Exy, or I don't know. You know, like
Oh,
again to like create a more personal relationship with it. Even though
yeah.
I could also see that that could be problematic because like with every relationship, you know, like it might be difficult, even if it's a toxic one or not such a good one, to let go of it, right? And like that there are sometimes, and I remember we've been speaking about this, and I do exercises with the women in my program also on this of like the hidden benefits, right? Of like chronic conditions, chronic skin issues, like how is it actually this little thing, XE, how is it serving you in your life? What do you actually gain from it, right? And there's quite a bit of research I remember on this topic. Super fascinating. Do you have any thoughts on that? The hidden
Very good.
benefits?
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes.
Mm.
And, you know, so we're talking about the inner work and we're talking about listening to your body, but also listening to this thing, this experience that you are having that is called a disease. Another label, of course. But, and we're talking about changing our relationship with that experience. I think a fantastic way of doing that is perhaps by naming it, a name that makes sense to you, because in a way you are, here's a sort of a, I suppose, a language term, you are personifying it. You're giving it a
Yes.
character. You're giving it a backstory. And it's like a part of yourself. So, you know, some of your listeners might be familiar with parts work, for example. The theory being that we as beings are not just one personality, we are a whole lot of sub-personalities
We are
jostling with
many.
each other, negotiating with each other, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that condition is one of your parts. And if you could give it a character or let it give its own character, right? So explore it. If you were to like even imagine, like Jung's active imagination, give it a voice, give it agency. If you were to listen to it and say, you know, imagine you could talk to me, dear eczema, Exy, or whatever your name happens to be. Let's have a conversation. So yeah, one could get really innovative. It could even become like a game, but a meaningful game. And maybe it needs
Mm.
to be because it doesn't have to be all so heavy. But I happen to think that's a very natural process. Actually having a conversation with a part of you that is bothering the other parts in some way.
Yes. And again, for everybody listening, you know that that's exactly what we're doing to kind of like personify, create, you know, like a connection with that part of you, because your skin is literally a part of you, right? Like it's not some disconnected thing out there, like it is you, even though at the same time we are not the body, we're something beyond that. But on some level, this is still you, right? And so really understanding that it's not this thing that we need to get rid of, but rather that needs to be kind of like reintegrated based on whatever it needs, and to find that out rather than again like thinking, oh, it probably should be this, should be that. Like when we start working with something like active imagination, the subconscious mind, symbolism, conversation, dialogue with ourselves, we can go so much deeper. And that actually leads me to one more question, Henny, that I had for you in terms of like, I know you and I work with, you know, more of like the subconscious mind, right? Compared to something more traditional like therapy, right? And so from your perspective, like why is working with altered states of consciousness, meaning just like a different kind of awareness than the one that we're using right now in order to talk to each other, right? It can literally be as simple as relaxation, closing your eyes, and just turning your awareness inwards. We have so many different states of mind that we fluctuate throughout the day. Flow states, when we sleep, we're in a different state, right? When we're focused, we're in a different state. When we're relaxed, in a different state. But like the work with altered states through, for example, meditative, hypnotic, introspective states, why is that so much more effective than just talking about it from the conscious logical mind like we would do in therapy?
I think it's because our bodies are our subconscious. I think the cells of our body, our very physical being, that is what channels our subconscious. And so we can't speak to the subconscious through purely conscious means. We can't engage with our body purely through our thoughts. And so that's why I think ways of working with the unconscious, expanded or altered states of consciousness, that's why they are so effective. It's because that is the language of our bodies.
Yes. Coming back again to like, your heart is beating right now. There's some intelligence in that makes this happen without you consciously thinking about, oh, I just skipped a beat, you know? Like the subconscious mind rules the body. And therefore, if we want to communicate with the body, like we need to go on that same level.
Exactly. And
Yes.
our thoughts, our cognitive thoughts, our analytical thoughts are playing catch up all the time in any case, right? Because as we said earlier, our body knows these things way before our thoughts do.
Yes, absolutely. And Henny, if someone that's listening to this conversation, whether live or later, just feels hopeless, which I know is such a valid and, common thing to feel when you're dealing with years and years of chronic illness, like as a medical doctor, what is something that you would really love for these people to understand?
I would say to them, it's not your fault. It's not something that you are doing wrong. There's no need to be shameful or guilty. You are not broken. In fact, you are the opposite. You are going through an experience, and this experience will take you somewhere. It might be a very long journey, but when you come towards the middle or even the end of the journey, you will realize that it's actually been worth it. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself. This is a real experience, you're not making it up, and there is plenty of hope.
I love that. And just from our conversation today, I know that we touched on so many topics. What would you say would be the top 3 things to really remember when it comes to the psychosomatic, placebo, and skin conditions or chronic conditions?
Choosing only 3. Well, I would...
You can go for 5 if they're...
let's try for 3. Yes, well, I think firstly, recognize that we are both somatic and psychological and spiritual beings, that it's not one or the other. It is all fused, it's all together. Secondly, I think we need to learn to listen to our bodies and give our bodies characters, listen to the story of our body. So a somatic embodied awareness practice, I think, is always going to be a useful thing. And then, I would say the third thing is that we need to approach things holistically in an integrated fashion. But if we keep doing the same thing over and over, we're going to get the same result. And that's why it's often useful to work with a skilled practitioner like you, Mia, who can help someone hold that space and rewire things. I think that was 3.
Yes, I think so. And, I mean, I think it was Einstein, no, who said, like, it's the definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and to expect a different result. And I had to ask myself that question very honestly when I was, back in the middle of my healing journey, and just be like, okay, are you sure that the 15th detox is finally gonna make a difference? Oh, but maybe I just need to use the different juice, or maybe I need to do bone broth, or maybe a combination of it. And so eventually to just like try something else and, give it a shot to really have a different outcome, I think makes sense. I mean, smart people before me have said this, their words, but not mine. But I fully agree. And, besides all of my own questions that I could keep asking for many hours, because I love this conversation so much and I really value and appreciate all of your thoughts and angles and wisdom from, the medical world mixed together with more holistic healing rather than just treating the symptoms, which unfortunately is often the case in the medical world. And I'd love to open up the space a little bit for the people listening here right now for asking any more questions to Dr. Hennie, as we have the privilege right now to still have him in the room. So I see that already someone had a question, Hennie, so I'm just going to read that out, okay, and see if you have an answer. So first of all, wonderful conversation. Thank you too. Dr. Hennie, you mentioned detoxes don't make sense biologically. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Yes. This might be controversial, but the basic premise of a detox is that there are toxins in your body that you need to flush out. Is that true though, right? That's where the sort of biological sensibility starts to come in, because look, there might be potential toxins in our body, maybe in things that we eat, for example, or in things that we absorb from the environment. But you know what? The so-called clinical significance of that is probably pretty low. Yeah, I'm not talking about obvious poisonings, right? Like you live in an area where there's plenty of mercury, for example, and you get mercury poisoning. But these sort of more subtle toxins that we have in our body, our bodies have been dealing with those toxins for ages. As long as we've been humans, we've been exposed to toxins from the environment, and our bodies have learned to deal with them. So if unless you are really sort of being poisoned, I suppose, overtly, I think this idea that we have these toxins running around in our body and therefore we need to detox, even if we had such toxins in our body, detoxing is not necessarily going to help, because how are you going to remove those toxins? If there were an effective way, then maybe it would be effective. But think about classic detoxing programs. What do they actually do, right? Everything from flushing out our bodies by taking in plenty of fluids, or things like taking other substances that are supposed to bind the toxins and therefore detox. There are so many theories about detox. Biologically speaking, none of those things actually really do much, at least in my opinion. Maybe they have a placebo response. And again, if it has a placebo response, why not? Fantastic, right? But from a purely biological perspective, it doesn't really sort of make sense. And if you look at the data, the data supports that. There's actually very little data that any form of detox actually makes any difference to diseases. But again, that's purely from a biological perspective. I'm not saying it doesn't have a role to play from other perspectives.
Yes. I love that. And especially considering, I mean, again, my own experience, but how much stress I've experienced around having to then stick to, very rigid protocols. Man, it was hard, right? And then the whole self-blame train went off again of like, you're just not strong enough, because if you really wanted to heal, then you would stick to it and then you would push harder. And I was like, okay, I just can't do it. So I guess because I'm weak, then I have to suffer. And all of that, which we've spoken about for quite a while now, creates its own inner cascade of mess
Yes.
that doesn't really allow our body to actually
Yes.
find back
Yes.
to
And
balance.
we were speaking earlier about perhaps actually doing less. When in doubt, do less. You know, and a detox is
Mm.
actually something very active, isn't it? It's trying to
Mm.
engineer a solution instead of discovering a solution.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We have one more message that just came through. Sharon is saying, "This was fabulous. Thank you so much. My personal takeaway is to let go of control and embrace acceptance and trust in my body. This has been very inspiring and confirming. Thank you again."
Lovely.
Excellent.
Well done, Sharon. Well
Wonderful.
done.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Henny. This was an inspiring conversation. Like I said, I could continue for hours, but let's make a stop here. And I would hope to, yeah, continue the conversation though in episode number 2 on, even more juicy details on the whole world of fascinating connection between the mind and the body. So thank you so much.
Mia, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go well.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
You too.
Take
You too.